Welcome to Bonkers for Boro, and I'm joined by Teesside Live reporter Craig Johns, who has had a rather hectic last 24 hours following the sacking of Michael Carrick. The club confirmed the news yesterday, early afternoon, the news that Carrick would be leaving alongside Jonathan Woodgate and Graham Carrick, with no further comment with regards to a potential replacement or the exact reasons for why he was sacked. So that's why I've got Craig on. He's volunteered to come on and have a chat with me about exactly what's been going on at the Riverside. So first of all, how are you doing, Craig? Are you over the last 24 hours?
Yeah, I wouldn't say over. I would say it's just all rolled into one, really. There hasn't been night, day, or anything like that. It's just all been just time continuing.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what was your initial reaction when you heard the news that he'd been officially sacked?
Yeah, I guess it's a mixture of kind of surprise and shock, but then also not. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, shouldn't be shocked because let's be honest, on the evidence of last season and over the 2.5 years he had in charge, the fact of the matter is Boro have regressed and in last season and under no uncertain terms was a failure. They finished 10th in the division with a squad that ultimately, certainly at the start of the season, I think should have been good enough to compete and get in the top six. Obviously, not everything that happened last season should be solely put down to Michael Carrick. I think losing Emmanuel Latilaf in January, that's obviously a massive factor in where it went wrong for Boro. The injuries that were suffered throughout the team was a massive factor, particularly losing Ben Doak at the same time they lost Latilaf. But I definitely think there were issues there, within Michael Carrick's coaching setup, in terms of his in-game management, his tactical inflexibility. I think the fact that, after losing Latilaf and Ben Doak, they completely lost all of the cutting edge and attacking threat, really. But rather than try and find an alternative way, try and find a way to get the best out of the options they did have available, it was kind of just let's keep going with what we do. Let's there was, and I guess that was a theme of his whole time at the club, really, wasn't it? He had a set way of playing and he very, very rarely went away from that. I know he would say that there were variations game to game, and I guess there were subtly, but more often than not, it was quite obvious to see the type of football he played, and managers figured that out as well. The amount of managers last season who said, we know how Boro are going to play, and then they came with a game plan set up against Boro, and it worked. They successfully took points from Boro. It happened too often last season without Boro really changing anything. So in that sense, no, there isn't surprised. It probably does fail. It probably did fail at the end of the season when they finished 10th, missed out on playoffs. That actually it probably could do with a change in direction, some fresh ideas and things like that. Having said that, there was surprise because, as I've said a few times on Teesside Live and in articles I've written and stuff, the sense that I got and the noise that we were getting out of the club suggested that there was a desire for Michael Carrick to continue. Sorry, children in the room. The sense that I got was that the club wanted Michael Carrick to continue. They were conducting this review, as we know, which is ultimately what's led to the decision to sack him. But the review really was described to me as not scapegoating anyone. It was, looking for solutions and looking for the reasons why last season happened. And then ultimately it was going to be down to Michael Carrick to decide the solutions and the changes that were needed. Was he happy to work within them? Was he happy to go along with the changes that were decided? Now, at this moment in time, I don't know the exact reasons why they've come to this decision to sack him. Part of me does wonder, is that a reason? Have they conducted this review, came up with X, Y, and Z that needs to change next season, and ultimately Michael Carrick's decided that he doesn't agree with those changes and can't work within those changes, and is therefore, there's been a mutual decision that actually it's better to part. If there isn't that kind of unilateral thinking, then sometimes it is just better to part. I think we saw that at the end of Chris Wilder's time in charge of Middlesbrough as well. So I do wonder if that's a thing. But as I say, because all the noise in the week since the end of the season was how much Michael Carrick was liked at the club and how much they wanted it to work out for him. I think there was that surprise there that ultimately the decision was made that Michael Carrick would be leaving the club, particularly as well because what is it, 3-4 weeks now since the season finished. The longer it went on, the more you felt that it was unlikely that he would be leaving. But alas, here we are, and he has, and the search for a new manager begins.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a strange few weeks because I don't know. I think I speak on behalf of quite a lot of fans who sort of believe that the longer time went on since the end of the season, almost the more likely it was that Carrick would be staying in charge. As you said, it was the noises were that he was kind of liked. I've been reading a lot of your work. I've been reading a lot that's been coming from the Northern Echo and stuff, and even just the sort of the subtle noises that have been coming have been sort of almost like leaning in the direction of the chances are Carrick will probably stay, but what changes will there be around that? So obviously the decision's been made for Carrick to move on. I appreciate that you the specific details that might not divulge them anyway, as much as fans would love to hear the full reasons. But what other changes do you expect to be coming as a result of this review, Craig? Obviously, Carrick's gone, Woodgate's gone, Graham Carrick's gone. Do you think there'll be anything else, or do you think that'll be the extent of the the findings of the review?
Yeah, well, I guess, again, without having had this confirmed and just going by what we were told before the review started, I think, Carrick leaving was the kind of the most drastic thing that could have come from the review. So I guess within that, the suggestion would be that changes will be coming, but they'll be more natural because Carrick's going. So I think, to me, it seems obvious that there must have been changes that were wanted. That Carrick didn't want to be part of, and Carrick didn't feel were right. And if he can't work within the changes, then it's better to part ways. And in terms of the kind of changes that were being spoken about to me, I think there was concern about the injuries and how they improved them, though it was stressed that Michael Carrick, I know there's been a lot of talk about, Michael Carrick's training methods, is he overworking them, etc. Is that the reason for injury? It was stressed that wasn't the case. I think there was definitely, investigation to be done on the injuries and how they improve them. So whether there was an issue there, I think his coaching team was definitely something that they were going to look at and ways they can look at it. Middlesbrough lost Aaron Danks 12 months ago to Bayern Munich. And, I think it became very clear over the course of the season as he was very successful. And, we hear a lot of good things about the work he's done in Germany. Middlesbrough were therefore lacking last season. Obviously, Michael brought in his brother Graham, and I'm sure he had his strengths as well. I don't think it's fair to just say, he wasn't good enough. I'm sure he did offer a lot, and we don't see that kind of stuff on the training ground. But I think what we saw last season a lot, and not necessarily throughout Michael Carrick's time in charge of Boro, but definitely last season, was in-game management being a big problem. The amount of times last season we saw opposition teams change the game, managers with positive substitutions and tactical changes in the middle of games, and Middlesbrough just didn't react to it. Michael Carrick didn't react to it. He would stand and watch for 10-15 minutes, and in that 10-15 minutes Middlesbrough had gone from a good position in the game to losing or being pegged back. The Millwall away recently is the most recent one that really stands out to me as where that happened. But it happened a few times, and I remember discussing it a few times. Bristol City away is another one I particularly remember where we were discussing it. He always played it down, but it just seemed really obvious that something had changed in the game. Momentum had flipped, and yet Michael Carrick just stood watching and didn't do anything. And ultimately, it went exactly as you expected. Sometimes with these kind of things, you can put 2 and 2 together and make 5. And within that, Aaron Danks has gone, that happens, 2 add 2, and you come up with 5 being that Aaron Danks has missed. Whether or not that is true, I don't know. But it feels like too much of a coincidence that didn't ever feel like an issue previously. And then all of a sudden, it was a big issue this season. So yes, I would imagine the coaching team would have been something that was looked at. There was definitely within the club, talk of, do we need more experience on the coaching team? And Michael Carrick had always played that down, always kind of, no, the coaching team's fine. We don't need any, nobody new on the coaching team. So, maybe that was something in the review that came up, like you do need something on the coaching team. And if Michael Carrick didn't want that, then again, it's that, that division that ultimately doesn't serve anyone. The other things like recruitment, I think, was obviously going to be a big one. I think this change will ultimately lead to perhaps a refinement of how recruitment works. I mean, we all know roughly how it works now at Middlesbrough, with the coaching team and a recruitment team separate. Kieran Scott kind of leading up the recruitment team as head of football. I think in the past, and whether or not this changes, it's always been a case that the recruitment team find players and present them to the coaching team, and the coaching team will kind of, at the start of a window or before a window, kind of tell the recruitment team the type of players they're looking for, the type of players they feel they need. Whether or not that changes now, I think the thing has always been Boro would never sign a player without the head coach's consent, and I think that's why in January we got, for example, Kelechi Iheanacho instead of David Strelec. Well known that was the kind of recruitment team's big pick, was David Strelec. Iheanacho was on the list, and Michael Carrick ultimately spoke to people, felt that Iheanacho had that championship experience and experience of English football in general, and felt that that was the right option at the time because it was mid-season and they needed someone to hit the ground running, whereas Strelec would have been coming in from Slovakia and perhaps needing a bit of time to adapt to English football. So, so I mean, it's easy to criticise Michael Carrick for that now, knowing how bad Iheanacho ended up being. But you can, without hindsight, understand why that decision was taken at the time. When you're losing your striker in Emmanuel Latilaf, who scores as many goals as he does and is in general as important as he is, you probably are thinking Iheanacho is the one to kind of come in and hit the ground running. Obviously, it didn't work out, and that might lead to changes within exactly how recruitment works. Because I think if Kieran Scott and the recruitment team had their way in January, I think it's almost certain that David Strelec would be a Middlesbrough player right now. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's slight tweaks in terms of how the recruitment works and who ultimately has those kind of responsibilities. But that's a really difficult one, I think, because I think as much as it maybe didn't work in January, ultimately the head coach is the one who's got to work with the players. So, can you go down a full, it's a very continental route, I guess, of the head coach having no say whatsoever in the players they want, or certainly, the recruitment team getting the final say. I guess the recruitment team are always recruiting for the head coach, in that the head coach will always be telling them, the type of player they want. But when they then present the player to the head coach and the head coach picks which of those players, does that change slightly? Is it a case of the head coach says, I need a competitive midfielder, and rather than being presented with a list of 3 competitive midfielders, the recruitment team just say, right, there's your competitive midfielder, and they pick who that they know what they want, they then pick it. I don't know, but that's certainly something that I felt was going to come or be discussed within the review recruitment. The other one that I've always spoke about is the academy and the use of the academy. I think Michael Carrick gave a lot of opportunities in terms of players from the academy training with the first team and also travelling and being part of the match day squad. So there was a lot of young players made the bench under him. But in terms of that next step, playing regularly or certainly playing, enough games to kind of satisfy them, I don't think that happened often enough. The club invest an awful lot of money in their academy to keep it at the top Category 1 level. And I know there's frustrations at the club at the fact that players before they reach 17 are being picked off and poached by some of the bigger clubs in England. Which, unfortunately, the club can't do much about. You can't contract any player until they turn 17. So a lot of the best talents beyond under the age of 17 are being picked off. And, how do you stop that when you can't contract them? You have to convince them that Middlesbrough is the best place for them to be over, a Chelsea, a Manchester City, a Liverpool, a Manchester United, etc. That's a hard sell because they're huge clubs. There's no denying that. But what Middlesbrough can do that perhaps those clubs can't is show that there is a pathway. And how do you do that? It's, you give Law McCabe more minutes on the pitch. I know they've got Hayden Hackney playing now, but it took him, quite a long time to get there. They've had, Law McCabe, George McCormack, other players like that who've had a bit of time around the first team, but probably not getting on the pitch as much as they might have liked. So perhaps that's something that needs looking at as well. But again, playing devil's advocate and, kind of looking at it from Carrick's point of view, there's pressure always to win games. You don't win 2 or 3 games in this game now, and fans are on your back, your job's under pressure, etc. And ultimately, if the young players just aren't quite ready, or you don't feel they're quite ready, how do you put them in over a senior player who you'll have more belief in being able to get you a positive result? It's a difficult balance, and I guess if that is a direction to go down, there might have to be a slight realignment of expectations. I guess if we want to see more academy players, even if they're not quite ready, we might have to appreciate that might come at the expense of results sometimes, but with long-term game.
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting one. I think a lot of fans would like to see more academy players given a chance in the first team. But it was really interesting what you're saying there about the January transfer window and about sort of like almost how much of a turning point it sort of was in the I guess in the context of the season, but in the context of Michael Carrick's reign as well. Because up until that point, you really sort of felt that a lot of the signings that had been made in previous windows to that were very much strategic. They were very much driven by Kieran Scott and the new recruitment team and the way that they were wanting to do things. And in January, there was a notable shift where reports were suggesting that a lot of the players who were brought in were like, I know it doesn't work as black and white as this, but they were Michael Carrick signings as opposed to Kieran Scott's signings. And I think personally, I mean, we got to the end of January and I was quite happy when on paper Iheanacho came in as a replacement for Latilaf. You kind of thought, great, he's going to come in and hit the ground running. And as he said, it didn't quite work out. But what do you know about that sort of dynamic, I guess, between Carrick and Kieran Scott in January? Do you think January was, I don't know, a particular turning point, I guess, in terms of the relationship behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was a turning point in terms of relationship. I mean, everything we've heard, there wasn't any breakdown in relationship or anything like that. This is by no means a kind of the end of Chris Wilder's reign, where clearly, relationships completely broke down and you had 2 parties wanting to go in complete other directions. But I do think there was a slight move away from the ideal way that if you like, Kieran Scott would want to go down, that kind of, he doesn't like the comparisons as much to Brighton and Brentford because they do things in terms of scouting very differently. I know Brentford and Brighton are very data-driven, whereas Kieran's a bit more, I don't like to use the word old-fashioned. I don't think that's the fair way to call it, but the kind of like hands-on, watch a player, speak to representatives, build relationships, the more traditional way, I guess, of doing recruitment rather than just relying on databases and numbers, which is how Brighton and Brentford are known for doing their business. But in terms of the Brighton and Brentford model, in terms of the long-term thinking, the long-term strategy, the thread through the club, and a clear kind of understanding of we are happy to sell a player for large profit to boost the club's finances, to keep us going for X, Y, and Z. We will sign a replacement for that player. Yes, he won't cost as much, but we've made the club X million and only spent Y million. So the club is now growing year by year financially, which allows you to grow year by year on the pitch, because you gradually, as your finances improve, so too does the caliber of player you're able to sign. And I think for Boro, that's really important in the current climate, because as we know, they're competing against teams with parachute payments. And, straight away when the 3 clubs come down from the Premier League every summer, they're £50 million richer than every other championship club. That's before they've sold any of the Premier League players that they have. And usually every summer there's at least 2 or 3 in all 3 of the Premier League squads who are good enough to go for big money. I know they've been relegated for the Premier League, but they've usually got at least 2 or 3 stars who other Premier League clubs or clubs in Europe look at and say they're worth a punt. And you go out and get them, and so that makes that the parachute payment receiving clubs extra money on top of that, which means they can just carry big squads, they can carry squads full of quality and depth, and to compete with that is really, really difficult, and it's why Boro and other clubs have to do things a bit differently, and have to go with the model of trying to recruit players and make profit out of players, and player trading to increase revenue, etc. It's so important to remain competitive on the pitch with those clubs receiving parachute payments while staying within the PSR limits, which is obviously what Middlesbrough have to do to avoid points deductions, transfer embargoes, etc. So it's such a difficult climate to work under, and I think where Middlesbrough perhaps haven't quite got it right yet, and I don't think this is necessarily a Michael Carrick problem, I think this goes right throughout the club, is that they've also got, as well as having that Brighton and Brentford desire to work in that way, they've also got this really ambitious short-term desire to get back to the Premier League. And it means that while they've got this model bubbling away of signing the Tommy Conways, signing the Morgan Rogers, signing the pushing the Hayden Hackney, signing the Emmanuel Latilafs, they've also got this burning short-term desire to always compete every season, even if they're not quite ready. It wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing, as much as it's a hard sell to say, we need 2 or 3 years to really build our squad, really build our finances, get into a position where we're ready to really then push. In the meantime, we'll remain as competitive as we can, but we're not really pushing for promotion just yet because we're not quite ready. But they're not quite willing to fully commit to that model. They remain, really committed to a short-term kind of desire to always push for promotion, which means you get the other signings as well, which might imbalance things slightly. You get rather than Strelec, we should get Iheanacho because Iheanacho's got a bigger chance of kind of pushing us straight away. You bring in your Ryan Giles on loan and use up a loan space on Ryan Giles because he's previously done it, and you have that strong desire to get him back and hope that he can reproduce. That kind of thing. There's that. It's still an imbalance, I guess you might call it, between long-term goals and long-term kind of thinking and planning and building, and short-term ambition to still try and push for promotion. And yeah, I guess that's what I'd say where I feel January probably didn't quite go as well as it could have done. Is that maybe they're just not getting that balance quite right. The commit to one or the other, I guess.
And a lot of that kind of can come down to, I know me and you have spoken about it before, about kind of communication and that sort of thing as well with supporters. It's almost like managing fans' expectations as well, isn't it? I think when you come out at the start of the season and say, we're going to be challenging for promotion, we're going to be challenging for the top 6, it's not fans getting carried away with themselves. It's no one being deluded. It's literally, if you're hearing it from the horse's mouth that that's the target, well, then that's the benchmark. If you fall short of that, then it's going to be deemed as a failure. Whereas, like you say, if they did take a slightly more conservative approach and it was maybe communicated that, look, we're in the middle of this process, and like you say, it might take 2 or 3 years to do that, fans, they might be a little bit unhappy or peed off about it at the very start, but then their expectations are managed over these next couple of years. When things don't go quite right, or you finish 8th, 9th, 10th in the championship, well, then people are a little bit more understanding and a little bit willing to a little bit more willing to take a long-term sort of view on it. But yeah, it's interesting. So obviously Michael Carrick's gone now. I hope to be blunt about it, but football moves on very quickly, and so all of a sudden you start looking forward. I know that you're going to be busy in the next couple of days finding out what's going to be going on next. So I personally haven't seen much in the way of names linked with the job, but from your point of view, Craig, have you heard anything about names who could potentially be of interest for Middlesbrough, or names who could be in the mix?
No, so I mean, at the minute we're very much working on kind of maybe names previously linked or, names that we know are liked. So I think that's really why at the minute the top two kind of candidates that most people are speaking about are Steve Cooper and Rob Edwards. We know that both are liked within the club. A lot of people within the club know and like Steve Cooper. Whether or not he would be willing to drop down the Championship again, whether or not I believe he's still entitled to money from Leicester City after being sacked by Leicester. But if he were to take a job right now, he'd forfeit the rest of the money that he's owed from Leicester due to the terms of his payout when he left Leicester City last season. So from what I understand, he turned down a couple of Championship jobs last season. So whether or not he is at this time ready to get back into work and willing to, I think where it could work in Middlesbrough's favour if he was someone that wanted to appoint, is that I can't see, even if he wants to get back to the Premier League, I don't really see any Premier League jobs that are coming up where he'd probably be the candidate for them. So I think unless he, and then the only real other Championship job now that's going to come up is Leicester, and he's not going to get the Leicester job, obviously. So, yeah, if he is in a position where he's like, yeah, I'm not bothered about that extra money from Leicester, I want to get back into work, then, Middlesbrough is still a very attractive job. Everybody knows Steve Gibson's reputation within the game. They all know how much he backs managers. There's a very clear model at the club now where I think people, will look and think I can go there and do something. A brilliant stadium, brilliant infrastructure, a really passionate fan base. The right person can turn Middlesbrough around and get them going upwards very quickly. And I'm sure someone like Cooper would back himself to do that. He knows Kieran Scott does Steve Cooper, so he'd be perfectly happy coming and working within that structure, I'm sure. And for exactly the same reason, Rob Edwards is another name who features highly on all the bookies lists and is being talked about. He was interviewed when Michael Carrick got the job. He worked with Kieran Scott and head of recruitment Chris Jones at Wolves. He was an academy coach at Wolves when they were both on the recruitment team there. So they know Rob Edwards really well, have known him for many, many years. And again, he'd be comfortable coming in and working within that model. Obviously, Kieran Scott won't get the definitive say on the next manager because Steve Gibson's a big, big part of that. And that's ultimately why last time around Michael Carrick was the one that went with over Rob Edwards, because Steve just had a good feeling about Michael, really liked Michael Carrick, and, still really likes Michael Carrick. I think that's fair to say. So whether or not Kieran can convince this time if Edwards is indeed the one he wants, whether Kieran can convince Steve this time, it remains to be seen. But Edwards is someone who's liked, he's available. It would make sense that he is again interviewed for this role. Does he excite fans? Is he the one who will unite the fan base again and get everyone, feeling hopeful for the new season? That's where I'm not sure on Rob Edwards, whether, how that one would be taken. Beyond that, it's difficult to see Danny Rose being linked with every job that comes up this summer, and, understandably so. He's dealing with a lot of kind of off-field problems at Sheffield Wednesday. So it's understandable, really, given that he's done such a good job there. I would say, with the resources he's had at Hillsborough, to have had the couple of seasons that he's had there is really, really impressive. And he comes across as a really good guy, actually. The couple of times where obviously Boro have played Sheffield Wednesday, he does this thing as he comes into his press conferences. He goes round and shakes every journalist's hand before he does his press conference. And there's a great story a couple of years ago. I'm sure Scott's told this publicly, so I'm sure he won't mind me telling it. But Scott Wilson from the Northern Echo sat with his back to the table and he's tapping away on his laptop as we do post match, and he feels this tap on his shoulder, and thinking it's just one of the other journalists coming to talk to him while he's busy, he kind of brushes them off, 2 minutes to it. And then as he feels that the presence is still lurking over his shoulder, he turns around to realise it's actually Danny Roll, and he's come to shake his hand. And yeah, that's a thing he does. It's really, really random. I don't know why he does it, but comes across as a nice guy anyway. It's a nice touch. And whenever I've sat in a room as he's being interviewed, he comes across as, kind of a nice guy and very open in terms of his press conferences, which I think is probably something that could be needed at this time at Boro, because Michael Carrick was quite guarded and his communication wasn't always the best, which, caused some of the disillusionment that there is in the fan base at the minute. The problem with Roll is I believe he's got quite a big compensation fee attached to him. If you want him out of Chef Wed, you need to pay a considerable sum, as I understand it. And that it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's the reason why many of the jobs he's been linked to this summer, he ultimately hasn't got. Clubs not being willing to pay that compensation package. Beyond that, there's not many names at the moment really kicking about. I wouldn't at all be surprised if Cooper doesn't want it, if Cooper isn't willing to come. I wouldn't at all be surprised if Boro go quite left field. And, Kieran Scott was at Norwich when they plucked Daniel Farker from Dortmund's under-21s, relatively unknown in this country, a bit of a risk. And they went on an incredible journey with Farker in charge. So Kieran Scott has history. It's becoming increasingly kind of the popular, the trendy thing to do, isn't it? Is to go up the continent and find a young coach. Sunderland took the gamble with Regis Labrie last summer, and that's worked out incredibly for them. He's led them to promotion, and there's many other, young managers come from the continent or come from the under-21 teams of big clubs and done really well, being really successful in the Championship. Let's not forget the last manager to win promotion at Middlesbrough was, of course, Aitor Karanka, who came in from the academy side, so the coaching teams of bigger clubs. So there's history there from Middlesbrough doing it and having success as well. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if, with the candidates in mind and appreciating that they need to unite the fan base and create a bit of hope for the new season, if they went down that route. Because I think, as crazy as it might sound, I think sometimes the unknown is exciting. And if it is a complete unknown, or there's very little to know about them, what they might do and how they might set up, etc., that's actually quite exciting in itself.
Definitely, yeah. It's going to be very, very interesting to see who comes in. I think you are right about that kind of unknown quantity in a manager, because I do think fans are sort of drawn to a sort of sexy manager, someone who kind of like comes in and will kind of like attract headlines and will be exciting and that sort of thing, rather than you kind of, I guess that's why the likes of you can say the likes of people like Steve Cooper, people like that don't necessarily get fans fully on board, because they're not kind of seen as that kind of sexy appointment as you're kind of saying. But I mean,
you see it with players as well, don't you? Like, if Middlesbrough are linked with Joe Bloggs this summer, there might not be as much as excitement as if they were linked to Juan Bloggio, for example. Like, there's a difference there, even in players. You hear that kind of exotic sounding name, and suddenly it's infinitely more exciting than Joe Bloggs, as I say. So
I'd definitely play for Juan Bloggio. So I'd be on board. So yeah.
And I say that as somebody who gets caught up in it exactly the same myself. I'm exactly the same. I hear that exotic name and I think, oh wow, this is exciting. It's like you say, it's that unknown quantity.
Absolutely. Well, it's going to be a really exciting few days and couple of weeks for Middlesbrough fans. I'm sure there'll be a lot of names. I'm sure there'll be a lot of links with managers. So it's well worth keeping an eye out for what's going on. So, Craig, where can fans keep an eye on your work and on the latest of what's going on in Middlesbrough's managerial search?
Yeah, so obviously direct on Teesside Live. There'll be updates there all the time. We've currently got a live blog running, so anything and everything that happens will be there. And then obviously new articles as each day goes by. All the socials, X, Blue Sky, Facebook, Gazette Borough, and myself are on there. And I'd urge everyone to check out WhatsApp as well. I think that our WhatsApp community and channels are now advertised in everything we write, particularly the community, because what happens with the community is, we don't completely hound you and push loads and loads of articles through that. But the ones that we feel are really relevant, the ones that we feel people will really want to read, we post that in the community, the WhatsApp community, and that essentially comes direct through to your phone, and looks like a text message from a friend or through WhatsApp, essentially. But actually, it's us giving you the latest breaking news. So we don't post everything. We appreciate that comes up on your phone like a message, and we don't want to completely clog your phone with notifications. But anything that's big, anything that's important, it'll head into the WhatsApp community group. So yeah, make sure you sign up to that, get in the community, and you'll never miss a Boro story.
Definitely worth keeping across it on Teesside Live. Yeah, it's going to be a lot going on over the next couple of weeks, and I'll try and keep you up to date with what's going on as well. So if you have enjoyed this video, please do hit like, drop a comment in below, and then hit subscribe as well. There's going to be plenty more coming up soon, as well as a transfer preview, I guess, for the summer with Craig as well, which will be going up in the next couple of days. So yeah, Craig, really appreciate your time this morning, and yeah, I will catch you all later on.